Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Today I'm back to my Unschooling 101 series and I'm going to share with you how to unschool science. And out of all of the subjects that there are, I honestly believe that science is the one that is most easily unschooled because just like John Holt once said, children are natural scientists. They are constantly out there exploring and getting into things and finding out how things work and finding out what happens when you do one thing and see what a reaction to it is. So this is something that, although it can intimidate a lot of people thinking that science is harder, kind of like along the same lines as math. But no, science is so easily accomplished when you just allow your children to follow their interests, to explore, and just give them the freedom to do the things that they choose to do. Now, the list of the things that can be done in an unschooling science atmosphere is extensive. Like it is never ending, the amount of things that your kids can do that would satisfy that science component of your homeschool requirements. But I'm just going to share with you a bunch of ways today that to show you what it can look like. Because very often, I think that when people who have never homeschooled before, when they look at homeschooling, they still kind of expect it to look like things that would be done in school. They still expect it to be things that are just very mainstream, very schoolish. They don't understand how much learning there is, even for a child to just be playing in the dirt. So that is why the things that I'm going to be talking to you about today, some of them may look like school does, not necessarily textbook wise, but it certainly looks like it will fulfill the science requirements that will be done in a school. But other things, it's not so much. It might look like the kids are just playing. It might look like they're really not doing a whole lot worthwhile. But these things are worthwhile because all of these things that I'm going to be talking about today are either accomplished through a lot of hands-on activities or through your child using their observation skills, which I think that most of us realize that kids are extremely curious. And the reason that kids tend to stop being curious once they hit that school age is because we start telling them what it is that they have to do. We start telling them what it is that they have to learn, the things that we think are worthwhile for them to spend their time doing. So they no longer have that input that a lot of younger kids have when they're just living their lives, getting into stuff, as we parents would say. So anyway, here are some things that your kids can be doing to unschool science. Nature study is huge in the homeschooling world, and it was brought about mainly by Charlotte Mason homeschoolers, Charlotte Mason herself actually, but there are a lot of homeschoolers, even if they are not Charlotte Mason learners, they still incorporate nature study. And you can incorporate nature study into an unschooling atmosphere also. I just think that it would be much more casual than what a more routine or structured learning environment would look like. And some of those things in an unschooling nature study could be your kids observing insects. How many times have your little ones gone out back and just watched the ants crawling around, or watched a grasshopper nibble on a blade of grass, or even gone outside and caught, we call them lightning bugs around here. Some people, I know that other places call them fireflies, but caught lightning bugs, and yes, sadly I have to say, would step on them and run their foot along the ground to see the glowing yellow on the ground. Okay. Observing insects is science, especially for younger children. And as kids get older, some of them can really develop a love of these insects. And I have talked so many times about my son, the way that he loves spiders. And, I never once said to him, "Hey, Dylan, you need to learn the name of every single species of spider, and I want you to know where they live and what they eat." I never once said that to him. That is something that he learned to do on his own just because he had an interest in it. And it's amazing because even now when we come across these spiders that I've never seen outside and I'm not too sure about whether they're safe or not, I always call him over and ask him, "Hey, Dylan, what kind of spider is that?" And I've never found him to be wrong, not even a single time yet. So anyway, even like studying anthills. Do you remember, when even ant farms. I remember when I was a kid, my parents got me an ant farm, and unfortunately, I used to take it down. My parents kept it on top of the fridge, so I couldn't get after it. But very often, I would take it down and I would shake it just so that I could see the ants rebuilding those tunnels. Cruel again, yes, but this is another way that you can really incorporate learning into your children's lives, science, by getting them ant farms, by getting them these butterfly kits that you can get even at places like Toys R Us, which is closed around here. I don't know if you have any anymore, but there are definitely kits like that you can get for your kids who really do have an avid interest in the insect world. But I really have to emphasize that this isn't something that you should try to force on them. This isn't something that you should buy for them and tell them that they have to do it. This is something that should be available to them if they choose to do it. Sea monkeys also is another really fun thing for kids to do. But anyway, even digging for worms and salamanders, my kids do that all the time. And yes, there is learning to be found in that. There is learning, what do worms do? And then you explain to them how worms are helpful for the environment, how worms are helpful for the soil, how worms are helpful for gardens, and then you can talk about the different types of salamanders. I don't know how many times my kids have caught worms and salamanders, and I will be the first one to admit I am very squeamish about that sort of thing. If my kids come near me with a worm or a salamander, yeah, I will scream like a baby and I will run. Honestly, I'll never forget the time my oldest son, who's now 25, he actually brought a salamander in the house and lost it. And I was so scared. Every time I would clean that playroom, I was so scared that I would come across a dried up salamander. I'm not really sure whatever happened to it. It must have disintegrated. I don't know. But again, you've got to embrace these sorts of things, these sort of antics that kids get into because they are learning all the way through this. Bird watching is another thing that lots of kids like to do. Sometimes even sketching the pictures of the birds that they see, listening to the sounds that they make, seeing what types of nests they make. Fishing, taking your kids fishing. My kids, my younger kids don't have their own fishing poles. So if you saw my nature study videos, you'll see that some of my kids actually fashioned their own fishing poles out of a stick, and they just tied some string to it, and they were using bread to catch fish. And yes, the fish were biting on them. So just fishing is a great spontaneous activity to do with your kids or planned, but it is something that is very natural. And again, it is something that is introducing them to the natural world around them. Now, while they're fishing, you could take them wading in the creek. My kids love to go wading in the creek. They love to go looking for minnows. They love to go looking for tadpoles, crayfish. They like to look for clutches of frog eggs. All of these things. And I remember a few years ago, we lived close to another creek. Now, we do go to a different creek that's by us now, but we used to go to another one that's about maybe 15, 20 minutes from here now. And it's right across the street from an elementary school. And I will never forget the one time that my kids, they were in the creek, wading around, looking for frogs, looking for tadpoles. And the kids came out of the elementary school. I guess it was a field trip to the creek. And all they did was they all were holding a paper like this. And they just silently filed past to the creek and just walked around it, looking down at their paper. I don't know if maybe they were supposed to check off if they saw certain things. They didn't even stop. They didn't even go near the creek. They couldn't have possibly even seen the sorts of things that were in that creek. And I remember during that time, I was thinking to myself, and that actually was when we were unschooling. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, there is so much freedom in homeschooling, because so many people think that the only way to learn is in school. But just seeing that comparison between how the kids at the school were approaching the creek and how my kids were approaching the creek, it really, really set in stone for me the fact that homeschooling is so much more hands-on, and it is so much more effective when it comes to learning about the real world. Now, some other things, some other ways that you can incorporate science is when they are observing the clouds, paying attention to the weather, paying attention to the seasons. And I'm not telling you that this means that you have to be assigning them charts to make or something. A lot of times this is something that kids want to do. It can be something as small as your kids checking the weather each day to see what the temperature is going to be. What's going to be the high? What's the low going to be? Where is it going to rain? Or they can be observing the changing leaves in the fall. And actually yesterday, this just happened. We were driving and either my 7 or 8-year-old, she asked me, she said, Mom, why do the leaves change color? So that was really a great opportunity for me to explain to her what happens, why the leaves change from green to those fall leaves. And it's a good thing that we actually covered this in school a couple of years ago, because I probably would not have known that off the top of my head, but I did, thanks to homeschooling. But yeah, kids do ask these things. They are curious if you give them the freedom, if you give them the time to just not be constantly bogged down with things that you are telling them to do all the time. Give them time to just think. Give them time to ponder things. And these questions will pop up, I promise you. Something else that we really, really enjoy doing together, and I'm not really good at it, but we do enjoy doing it together, is gardening. We made a vegetable garden this year, and I don't have a green thumb. I have like a brown thumb. I'm not good. The only thing that you could actually visibly see in my garden anymore were my corn stalks, because they were so high, because I couldn't tell the difference between what was weeds and what was the stuff that I planted. So yeah, that experiment didn't go very well. We're going to try again next year, but it was such a learning experience for my kids. And you don't know how thrilled they were to eat the corn that they actually planted with me. And we actually did eat some of the potatoes, and there was some spinach also that we got to eat out of it. And that was fantastic for them. They also really enjoy planting flowers, even, planting seeds. My 14-year-old, every time that we eat some sort of vegetable, she will gather up the seeds from it, and she will just plant them on her own. She had a bean sprout growing in her bedroom for the longest time, and she was actually doing videos of it, and she was recording how much it grew each day, and she was posting them on her YouTube video. She was so excited because the beanstalk got to be about this high, and then our cat ate it. So yeah, you have to watch out for that kind of thing. But again, this isn't something that I told her that she had to do. This is something that she does. She still does it now. Every time that we have seeds, she wants to collect them and she wants to plant them somewhere. And it's amazing to see that a lot of times the stuff really does grow. And I think that we've lost touch with that in our society. We're so used to just going to the store, going to the farmer's market to buy these things. And we don't realize that a lot of times it's pretty simple just to grow that stuff yourself. Another great lesson for your kids. And going right along with that is foraging, teaching your kids to forage. What sorts of plants are edible? What sorts of things are okay to eat? Very often we like to go picking mulberries. We like to go picking blackberries, and we will just do this at the park. And the kids will pick mulberries and they will eat them. And they only do this because we know the ones that they can eat and the ones that they can't eat. And this is something else that is really, really useful for your kids to learn. And also, what kids don't like: collecting things, rock collections, pine cones, seeds, the little helicopter ones that you can stick on your nose or fly up in the air and they swing down. That can bring about a conversation about different types of seeds, about how those are the ones that float away. And when your dog gets, like stickers stuck all over the fur, those are also seeds, and they are carrier seeds. So again, you can always bring about these conversations with your kids, natural, everyday conversations, without ever pulling out a book, without ever pulling out a worksheet and saying to them, okay, I want you to do pages 13 and 14, sections 1.1 and 1.2. It's not necessary. These things can come about in everyday life, and that is what unschooling is all about. Now, moving on from the outside world, I think that I've said a lot of the great outdoors, but that is not the only place for science to happen in everyday living. Kitchen science. How amazing is that? Even when you are cooking and baking, chemical reactions are happening. Now, in my math video, my unschooling math video, I was talking about how to use cooking and baking for math, with measuring things and dividing up portions and so on and so forth. But yes, science is happening. Today, my 16-year-old daughter baked bread. And what a great time to talk about chemical reactions, because you've got that yeast creating the chemical reaction that causes the bread to rise. You literally can find valuable learning experiences in everything that you do. The key, though, is not to overdo it. Don't bore your kids to death. I've done that. So I'm telling you, I actually have a video called, I think it's about not turning everything into a teachable moment. You've got to be careful with that. If your kids show interest, maybe move into it a little bit further. If they seem like they just don't care, just stop, because another door will open up that you'll be able to step into and dig further into with your kids. Another great way to do kitchen science is stocking up on all kinds of just regular things that you would normally have around your house, like baking soda, like vinegar, like cornstarch, like food coloring. All of these regular kitchen staples are great things for your kids to have their own labs in your kitchen. My kids love to make volcanoes. They've actually made them out of Play-Doh, and they've used the baking soda, the vinegar, and the red food coloring to make it erupt. They have made their own oobleck using cornstarch, and I honestly don't remember off the top of my head what the other thing was. But anyway, yes, have these materials at your kids' disposal. And I don't know if this is a true story or not, but what they always say about Thomas Edison, once his mother took him out of school because his teacher said he wasn't going to amount to anything because his brain was addled, she brought him out of school and she actually set up his own lab in the basement. Now, I'm sure that it wasn't just things like baking soda or, vinegar, but it was things that were going to enhance his learning. And, look at what became of him. So yes, give your kids that freedom. And just those items that I mentioned, they're really easy to keep in the house because most of us do have that in our house anyway. And they are very, very inexpensive and they are non-toxic. So that's always a plus too. Okay, now the next part that I'm going to talk about is how to work a little bit of engineering into unschooling. And, I even hesitate to say how to work it in. I should say more of how to observe it happening naturally in your kids. Because again, unschooling is not about you pushing things on your kids. Unschooling is about letting your kids discover things on their own. Now, does this mean that you could maybe set the materials out for them to see? Of course. Does it mean that you can make a suggestion and say, hey, do you think you'd like doing that? Yes, of course. But it's never about you telling them, hey, come here, I want you to do this right now. That's not what unschooling is about. Unschooling, again, is about letting your child have a say in what they're doing and just giving them lots of opportunities, lots of materials to inspire them. So back to engineering. My 14-year-old daughter, and I think I mentioned this in another video, I always call her my future engineer. Since she was little, she has always been the type of kid who she loves to take things apart. She loves to put things back together. She loves to see how things work. And at one point when she was 10, she actually took apart a light-up toy and found the little electrical circuit. She figured out how that electrical circuit worked, and she walked over to me and explained it to me. And again, yes, this happened while we were unschooling. So that was just, it was phenomenal for me to see that happening. And, the thing is that whole taking things apart and putting things back together, a lot of kids really enjoy doing that. But how often do we say to kids, oh, don't take that apart, you're going to break it. But, and I'm not saying that you should let your kids take apart their computer or something like that. But, have things around the house that you don't mind them fidgeting around with. Because even I remember my husband's grandmother used to tell me about how he was also one of those kids who was always tinkering with things, and he's still like that. He literally can do everything around the house. He is a jack of all trades. And his grandmother told me that they bought him a brand new bike, and so he went outside to ride his bike, came back with a really, really old one. It turned out that he traded a neighbor kid. He gave the neighbor his new bike and took the old bike because he wanted to take it apart and set it back up again. So my daughter definitely takes after my husband in that aspect. And yes, give your kids the opportunity to do that, even if you do have old computers around the house. Or even my husband, he's very good at taking apart computers and fixing them and all of that. And when he's doing that, very often he will call her over to come sit next to him and watch him, see him doing these things. These are all things that your kids are not only learning science in a natural way, but that's a great way to bond as a family when you are doing these things together that you both enjoy, that you both have in common. Another Another way that you can watch your kids tackle the science aspect is through watching them do physics. You know, physics, we always think of like those boring high school classes, but physics really is just really about the science of movement. You know, watching your kids learn that they have to push their cars to make it go. If they push it harder, it's going to go faster. If they push it soft, it's going to go slow. Same thing with kicking balls, throwing balls. All of those things are learning about how those laws of physics work. But it's not about sitting down and reading about them in a textbook. It's about actually seeing these things in action. Or like, I remember there was a tire swing when I was a kid at a park, and we used to love, we would do to each other what were called spinners. We would spin each other so hard that you would have to like hold on as tight as you could or you would fall off. What a great way for your kids to learn about physics just by doing things like that, things at the park, even on those little carousels, with the swings, with the seesaws. Just, there are so many ways to unschool science. I never want you to think that this is just too hard, because this is one area that, no, you definitely don't need to worry about this. Okay, so now we're moving into books, which, you know what? Not all kids really gravitate towards books, but a lot of kids do. And in those books, you know, you've got biographies of scientists. You have nonfiction books. There are so many nonfiction books at the library that your kids can just eat up if that's what they choose to do. Even fiction books. Last year, the kids and I read a book called Tesla's Attic. It was a fiction book, but it was actually about Nikola Tesla. He wasn't the main character, but he was mentioned several times in it, and it brought in a lot of facts about him, a lot of facts about the machines that he made, about the sort of things that he did. So even fiction books are a great way for your kids to encounter science in their everyday life. Also, Journey to the Center of the Earth. I mean, really, of course, that is a fantastic science book, and it's a classic. And you know what? It's got a movie to go that you could also watch too. If your kids don't like the book, put the movie in, because even that, they're learning so much, what different types of rocks are called. And it's just, it's just a treasure trove of information. And even though it's fiction, there are also how-to books that show you how to do different things in science, how to do science experiments. We've got so many books about science experiments, you know, backyard science experiments to do with stuff from around the house. There are books out there. I think her name is Janice Van Cleve. She has a lot of really great books out there about science projects for kids to do. And while your kids might not necessarily be entering a science fair, although they could be, it still gives them lots of opportunities to just experiment, just to see how things work, to see what happens when you do A, B happens. And this is just another great way for them to encounter this, especially older kids. The Janice Van Cleve books are really, really good. It has they have a lot of really great ideas. And then of course, we're going to move on last to visual media, because there's just so much out there just on YouTube alone. You know, you've got nature videos galore. You've got How Things Work. You have the Steve Spangler science experiments. Again, there are so many videos that show them how to do different science experiments, science projects, or even STEM activities. Wild Kratts. Now that's normally on Netflix, or not even, I forget, I think it's on PBS Kids. But anyway, so that might not necessarily be on YouTube, but you know, your kids can watch, they can watch Wild Kratts. They can watch Octonauts. My kids love that on Netflix. It's about sea creatures. My throat is going. Magic School Bus. Who has not heard of that? And documentaries. Whew, my voice is really going now. There's so many science documentaries out there. So I'm just going to cough. 1 second. I'm sorry. Anyway, this always happens lately. I don't know if I'm getting a cold or what, but anyway, unschooling science is just so easy and so natural and so much fun for your kids, because it's almost like it's giving them permission to just keep doing the things that they want to do. So I really encourage you that even if you're just going to try to work some of these activities into your normal homeschool routine, which again, I caution you against doing it, getting too strict about it, because if you get too strict, even these fun activities are going to seem too much like school. So I do want to say that. But also, even if you just want to embrace the entire unschooling philosophy, and if you're not ready to jump in it all at once, which I totally understand, because I'm not an unschooler. I do relaxed homeschooling, but I give my kids plenty of opportunities for unschooling, because I have seen the fruits of it. And that's why I wanted to share it with you today. Anyway, that's all that I have. Next week, I'm going to be sharing with you how to unschool history and social studies. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, leave one down below. And if you like my work, I encourage you to check out my Patreon page and see what rewards I offer for my patrons there. And I hope you have a great day.